Hello, welcome to this month's edition of the Seeker's Forum. Today we're going to be talking about the cosmos within, that unfathomable potential that exists in every one of us. It's like a great reservoir of possibility, imagination, discovery, growth. That's our natural endowment as human beings. This inner potential is the source of our primary inspiration, as well as revelation. It's the mystery that feeds the soul and connects us spiritually to the universe and to the life of this planet. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's one of my favorite authors and sages, described it as the infinitude of the private man. The infinitude of the private man. I especially like that term because of the way that it links the individual with the transcendent, the small and the great, like William Blake did when he saw the universe in a grain of sand. It reminds us that appearance is deceptive, and that even though we see ourselves as limited, tiny, separate beings with circumscribed minds and bodies, we are in fact vast beyond comprehension. In fact, we are galaxies in miniature, microcosms of the infinite whole. Now, that can sound very highfalutin, but in fact, this private infinitude that Emerson is talking about is right in front of our noses. It's as familiar as the air we breathe and the ground that we walk on. Anyone who dreams knows this. When you close your eyes at night and you enter this dream world of unknown places and unearthly creatures, you see that the mind is fathomless and that it's capable of moving through inner space like a satellite that's beaming back light from distant planets. Anyone who spends their waking time exploring their psyche, thinking about eternal questions, meditating, losing themselves in the wonder of nature, is very familiar with this visionary faculty that expands to take in life's miracles and realizes in that expansion that it is miraculous too. The word we give to this power of stretching to encompass what can't be contained is awe. Awe is our natural response to the supernatural mysteries that surround us. Awe and wonder expand the mind and reveal its true scale, which is infinite, regardless of the object in its gaze. Brian Swimme, the physicist, puts it beautifully. He writes, quote, "Whether contemplating the tiniest space between the petals of a deep red rose, or the vastness of something like the Bootes supervoid, that's 250 million light years across and the largest area of nothingness in the universe, awe allows the mind to fracture in wonder and reveal its cosmic capacities." Now, we need this awe and wonder, the capacity for cosmic awareness, as part of our well-being. Wonder and awe are not luxuries, they're necessities for a meaningful life. Because a lot of our suffering comes from deflation, this flat earth materialistic illusion of ourselves as much, much less quantum and elevated than we are. When you hear that, the ego may interpret it as grandiose, because the ego is uncomfortable with the prospect of infinity, because infinity threatens the ego's existence. And yet the ability to recognize our visionary powers is integral to the human experience. Emerson tells us that, quote, "A portion of truth, bright and sublime, lives in every moment, in every mind." When we're deprived of this knowledge of our inner cosmos, we are diminished, we're shrunken. And that's the state that a lot of people find themselves in today. Starving for awe, starving for wonder. Even though we Skype around the planet and we have mapped the genome and we know the sequence of pi, we can look under a microscope and see the miraculous, infinitesimally tiny movements of nature. Even though we have all of these things, our generation is the least awestruck that we know of. In fact, studies show that our Our grandparents, who had none of these things, were actually much more filled with wonder than we. Hooked up to their smartphones and their video games, kids today are actually more likely to have psychological problems than the average child under psychiatric care in the 1950s. Somehow in our technologically brilliant computerized lives, they've somehow grown less fascinating with time rather than more. And that points to the contradiction behind all of our progress, the danger of focusing on externals instead of on our inner cosmos, because it leads to a lot of pleasure but not so much joy. It gives you a lot of data but not as much wisdom. And it gives you lots and lots of overwhelm but not much awe. The philosopher and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel put it this way, quote, "People today are shocked by the weakness of our awe, but also by the weakness of our shock." When we are no longer awestruck by life, we forget about the inherent worth of others, as well as about our own divine potential. The lack of awe is what underlies the destruction of the planet. It's what's behind religious fundamentalism. It's what drives conspicuous consumption. Lack of awe is what sustains racism and violence. It's what keeps 12-step meetings full and antidepressant manufacturers rich. Lack of awe, lack of the inherent worth of ourselves and our lives. How else could we have 23 wars on the planet as we speak? Without awe, there can be no adoration. And without adoration, there can be no reverence. Without reverence, life shrinks into a kind of husk of itself, a room without a view. And stuck in this narrow state, many of us move through the world as if we had blinkers on, blinders. We repeat ourselves, we go unconscious, we get immured in our habits, and the stress and exhaustion and jadedness that come with a contemporary life. We do our best to work against jadedness, which is a contraction. Jadedness is a no to life. It's a essentially critical and rejecting stance. So when we do our best to work against this jadedness that shrinks us down, but it comes upon us anyway in this infuriating world. The world is absurd and run by so much mindlessness. How can we look at that, be a part of that, recognize that we are human as well, and not become jaded? How is it possible to know that if we had one less missile in the U.S. arsenal, we could feed all the children on the planet for a year? One less missile. And we don't do it. So how do we look at that and not fall into jadedness and what they call empathic distress? Empathic distress is not knowing how to help the migrants or the children or the teachers. And that empathic distress can turn into numbness. There's a numbness that comes with the technological age where we are able to kind of skate through life with virtual experience and have all this information but a feeling of powerlessness at the same time. And with that feeling of powerlessness comes less patience, less tolerance for process, for pausing, and for slowing down. And because of that, our souls shrink. The gifts of progress, things that should increase our quality of life, actually decrease our sense of meaning. Because when we skate on the surface of things, we miss the depths of our inner world and the potential that is there. Nevertheless, despite all of this, underneath this surface of life, this shimmering skin of samsara, we realize that there is an inexplicable magic and cause for wonder at every moment. That we have this extraordinary world within us and without us. And that missing the miracle around us is a great human failing. Emerson had a funny thing about this. He said, quote, "Miracles have ceased? Have they indeed? When? They had not ceased this afternoon when I got into the wood and saw the pine cone of the turpentine exuding from the tree, the chickadee chirping his cheerful note. Anyone who gazes upward at the rushing clouds or downward at the moss or stone and says to himself, miracles have ceased? Right. So that's the point. If we are blind, the miracles have ceased. If we see, then we realize that we're walking in nothing but miracle all the time. But how do we bring this sense of the miraculous and awe and wonder into our everyday lives? That's the question. Because when we do this, our hearts open. It's like climbing the last flight of stairs in your head and opening the window and looking at the sky. There's a kind of an astonishment that happens. That's akin to what mystics describe. Rumi, Hafez, Kabir. That ecstatic cry of longing that comes from glimpsing the divine, and recognizing in that glimpse our own true nature as part of the divine play. The natural response to that is wonder. It's awe. It's that feeling of buzzing aliveness inside your body. We come to see ourselves as they put it in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, as part of the net of Indra. The net of Indra. This idea of a connected cosmos that's where every jewel on the net has its place and also reflects the whole. We each have our place, and yet we reflect the whole. So we're aware of ourselves as individuals, and we don't lose sight of ourselves as inextricable parts of everything else. But of course, very few people can live in this place, in this state, all the time. The thing is that knowing that it's there, that it's possible, changes our lives. Just knowing that it's there. It gives us a horizon of wonder. Emerson puts this beautifully. He says, quote, the tradesman, the attorney, comes out of the din and craft of the street and sees the sky and the woods and is a man again. In their eternal calm, he finds himself. The health of the eye seems to demand a horizon. We are never tired so long as we can see far enough. Isn't that great? The health of the eye demands a horizon. We're never tired so long as we can see far enough. And it's for lack of a horizon of wonder that we sink into despair. But when we make room for this expansive, glorious experience of really recognizing the cosmos within, we open to meet a sweetness in life that actually runs through every moment of our being, because every moment contains a cosmos. Emerson said, the wisest are deceived and no one suspects the days to be God's. The wisest are deceived and no one suspects the days to be God's. We search the world over for spiritual light as seekers, when in fact we're standing in it all the time. And that's the cosmic joke. That's the Buddha's laugh. It's the punchline of the seeker's journey. That the journey itself, in its essence, is symbolic, even though it may involve actual travels and travails. Seeker's life isn't about setting out to find something out there that we don't have already. It's a symbolic journey from the familiar sense of ourselves as this small, separate, warring ego personality into a wider awareness of who we are underneath the mask. That's the meaning of the mystic adventure. It's about meeting ourselves as we already are and being shaken awake by that recognition. It causes a kind of conversion, a turning around, a facing of ourselves without a veil, and finally saying hello to the true nature. It's kind of like snapping awake from a bad dream. When you see that, as they say, what you're looking for is what is looking. That God is actually looking out from behind your eyes. And when you see that, it becomes as a kind of a revelation. And it's a revelation that leads to what Emerson called self-reliance. Self-reliance. Self-reliance is a term that a lot of us learned in high school English, but really didn't understand. because self-reliance isn't about rugged individualism alone. In fact, self-reliance doesn't have anything to do with the ego or selfishness or pride. Self-reliance means knowing the true self and recognizing that you are sufficient as you are, provided you acknowledge your reliance on other people. Because humility is integral to self-reliance. Self-reliance is a reliance on God. Emerson said, "No one is so weak as an egotist." Self-reliance is the antithesis of willful pushing, and it's a harmonization with life and resting in our own fullness. It's the opposite of the insecurity that a lot of people feel for most of their lives. That insecurity that comes from thinking that you're balancing the world on your shoulders. Self-reliance is completely different. Self-reliance is a kind of active surrender and an acknowledgement of the God within. And that acknowledgement dissolves the distance between us and the divine. And that recognition is what makes us astonished. To see that you are the very stuff that God is made of. It's literally mind-blowing. The Baal Shem Tov, the 18th century Hasidic master, described his moment of awakening as stepping out the back door of his own mind. That's what it's like. So it's a shift in perception, what Emerson called the angle of vision. I think of it as moving from the foreground to the background. You're noticing the vastness that we are a part of. The amazing thing is that this awareness is possible at any moment for anybody who is willing to stop and to pay close attention and to step outside the comfort zone of this small self into this immensity. It takes practice, it takes patience, and it takes low expectations, because spiritual life moves along very, very slowly. It moves in planetary time. It doesn't move in the time of the ego and the will that want it to move right along. But in contemplating this immensity, the thing that some people call God, we take on that immensity ourselves. That's the extraordinary thing. It's like your heart and your mind are stretched as you expand to inhabit the vastness of your own being. So ask yourself, when have you tapped into this immensity in your life and connected to the cosmos within? When's the last time that you had a sense of seeing with new eyes? Or that somnambulist sense of being shaken awake after you've been sleepwalking? Those moments of clarity. Epiphany is one word to describe them. Those moments when you see ordinary things through extraordinary eyes. Emerson called these moments lusters. And he thought that these lustrous, illuminated moments are what give a life its truest value. When we're shaken awake by something that shows us who we are. So ask yourself, does your life contain astonishment? Do you ever feel yourself sparkling inside? That sense of delight. These are great questions to ask ourselves, particularly in a world that seeks to flatten us and to keep us quiet and subdued, not overexcited, obedient, and easy to manage. Don't be too joyous. Don't be too big. Don't be too passionate or curious or self-reliant. Don't trust your own genius. But Emerson saw this picture so differently. It was just the opposite of that kind of self-diminishment and judgment. He said, quote, "Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which flows into you as life. Place yourself in the full center of that flood. Then you are without effort impelled to truth, to right, and a perfect contentment." Let me read that again. Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which flows into you as life. Place yourself in the full center of that flood. Then you are without effort impelled to truth, to right, and a perfect contentment. Beautiful. So opening to the flood of life is what connects us to the divine. And this happens moment by moment in our lives. So whatever practice you do that connects you to that deep self, that source that's bigger than this chattering little mind and emotional body, and whatever it is that connects you to that source is your lifeline to a very different kind of self-awareness. So that's what I wanted to say to you this month about the infinitude of the private man. I hope that you do some writing around this topic. It can take you to very deep and interesting places. And I'll talk to you again next month.